Hey everyone, welcome. Help yourself to pizza and coffee if you haven't already. Here with us today we have Kyle and Kristen from Tinderbox Entertainment, so give them your attention. Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you. Um, I guess let me just kind of get a feel for who's in the room. We're a video game company. Does anybody want to be in this realm of development? Or, yeah, at least interested in finding out more about it? Um, who has made a game? Right? Who has coded a program? All right. Who's drawn art assets? Okay. How about built a website? Okay. So they're all intermingled. How about musicians? Anybody play instruments? Okay. Does anybody know how games are made? Like in general? Okay. All right. Who doesn't? Everybody point and laugh. No, it's not that. No, it's so. Does anybody know how movies are made? More or less. At least watch the Oscars every now and then. Well, I don't. They're terrible. Okay. Sorry, Oscars. Um, the making a video game is a lot like making a movie, and these days there's really like no difference except for programming. All of your art assets in 3D or 2D have to be at a kind of quality that can be imported into a real-time game engine. And when I say they have to be, I mean they don't really have to be. Like you can still make pixel games and kind of low-res games that are super popular and more stylistic. But if you have the kind of talent and dedication to creating art in the Hollywood area, you can easily transfer that into video games. Um, does anyone know what normal maps are? I'm just going to see how. Normal maps? Anybody? No? Okay. Does anybody know about 3D geometry? Who would like to know about 3D geometry? Okay. Anybody planning a 3D game? Anybody planning any games? Yeah, okay, all right. 2D games. Yeah, okay, all right. So there's really no difference programming-wise between a 2D and a 3D game. They're largely the same, except that third dimension kind of screws you up every now and then. Physics. Anybody tinkered around in game engines? Unity, Unreal, Game Maker. What else is out there? Ogre. Um, okay. There's Blender as well. I always forget about Blender. Blender has a game engine built right into its 3D modeling program. It's really hard to use. Don't use it. But it is there should you want an open source version of something to tinker with. How many of you are tinkerers? Uh, like modding things? Yeah. Okay. Playing mods. Anybody play video games? Okay, because that's pretty important too. Well, we do all that stuff, and we do it all with just a few people. We are Tinderbox Entertainment. We have a studio based in Vancouver, Washington, and we've been around for around 10 years, um, making a living making video games. I myself come from the animation world, which is kind of why I started with the whole uh, movie prelogue here, because it's what I know the best, and I do think everybody understands movies a little bit better than games, even if they don't know how either is made particularly well. I transferred into video games because I could, um, and because I wanted to actually make some money. Um, as a starving artist in Portland, it's cool to work on your little animation project and get it done and show everyone on YouTube, but no one's going to pay you for that. If you do the same amount of energy and make a game, people will pay you for that. And I noticed this kind of shift in our entertainment structure, where people, humans, Americans specifically, were willing to pay a couple bucks to pay something. And this is like just prior to mobile app stores coming out. Steam was around at the time, but Microsoft had just kind of launched their version of the indie games area, although it was not what they called indie games later. Anyway, and I thought, well, hey, I can just make this little passion project of mine, get it out there, see what it'll do. It'll be proof of concept that I can actually finish a game, have it liked by somebody who isn't my mother, and try to make a living at this. And the more I did that, the more people I met in Portland and Seattle that wanted to do exactly the same thing. And now, 10 years later, we have quite the indie game community that helps support one another to get these things done. So if you're more technically minded and you want to find an artist, or you need a musician, start talking to the people in this room. Find out who they know. Networking is never going to hurt you. If you need something a little more structured and are like shy about approaching strangers, I usually am. I can talk to rooms full of strangers, but corner me in an alley, I get a little bit flustered. Well, don't corner me in the alley in the first place. That please, out in the hall is fine. I really recommend Pig Squad. I can't recommend them enough. They have kind of grown along with us. I think we predate them by a couple of years, but they've been around for 7 years, and it's the Portland Indie Game Squad. And how do I write them here? Pig. All right. It's pigsquad.com. They have a big party coming up on April 20th. I recommend going. They call it a drink and draw, which is kind of a misnomer. It's really a big party where independent developers will show their wares. It's part of Design Week, and it's over at the Evergreen, Southeast Portland. There's usually about like 600 people who show up, and so it's a relatively large party. Free and of all ages, though I do think you have to check out the website, and I think you do have to get event tickets, which are free, but they just tried to keep a cap on how many people are coming, that's all. So it's a wonderful place to try to do what we do. The leaders and the board of Big Squad will do their best to try and hook you up with what you need. Sometimes you'll maybe need a little money to like grease the wheels on hiring people, and sometimes you'll find people who are just at your level and want to make something cool, and they buy into your idea and will help you make it. We've had both experiences. All right, so since not a lot of people know how games are made, I thought I would just run through a quick lifespan of a game without getting into too much detail. So first thing is, I'm sure, it's basically software development with an entertainment aspect to it. So you're really kind of looking for that fun factor instead of like a spreadsheet, or a database for a car sales place or something. They just want the data, and it just has to work. In a game, it has to be fun. And if it's not fun, they're going to find something that is fun. How to occupy your time. Escapism is often one of the reasons we play games, but it's not the only one. So over here, I'm just going to write the idea. That's the first thing you have to do. You have to have an idea. Ideas are cheap, lazy bastards. Don't come to me with your idea and want me to make your game. That's never worked out. I will like your idea. You can tell me about it, and I can tell you where I see flaws or how to strengthen it. But I got ideas of my own, that I don't have to share with anybody. So this is one of the key things that being a pure game designer runs into a problem. There are jobs, game designer jobs out there for large firms, and I know quite a few of them, and their whole job is to make a fun game on paper, and then someone else will code it and create the art. But that by itself doesn't really fly in the indie game realm very well. You know, maybe one person I know can pull that off, and then has a team of people to like build it for them. But largely, your idea isn't enough. Okay, so you're gonna have to like sell this to somebody. You have to get investment, emotional investment from people who will help you build this. If you can't build it yourself, if you can build it yourself, by all means do that. But the next thing you got to do is document it, because if you don't have the documents and you can't even get this far, even for your own sake, and let's say you're never going to show these documents to anyone else, but if you can't make it this far, then you're pretty much in trouble. So this is really important. Document. It doesn't have to be like a game design document, so the GDD. Game design document. Okay? Your GDD is really important just so that you now have emotional investment yourself. It's like, I worked on this for an hour, and now I think it's awesome, and now I'm going to go show it to somebody. And they're going to say it sucks, and then you'll go back and rework it, and then you'll iterate on it, come up with a better idea, and I just want to kind of stress that if you don't have this, then you're doomed. And it doesn't have to be, super detailed. It can just be a high-level, one-page concept. In fact, it should be several different kinds of things. One should be like pitch, the elevator pitch. So one, maybe two sentences that explains what your game is. This would go on the back of the box if we had boxes anymore. So it goes on the description in the App Store or on Steam. Okay, and if you're not grabbing people up front, you're failing. But this is just more of a marketing thing. So you shouldn't be too concerned with this in the beginning. In fact, I would do this last. Okay, the pitch, be thinking about it. If you can distill it down to one or two sentences with the exact right, $50 words, then excellent. But I would do this last. First, what you really need to do is to have the gameplay. What does your game do? We're all kind of familiar with game genres, yes, more or less. Maybe you don't know all of them, but you know that there's like first-person shooters, and there's real-time strategy, and there's RPGs. There's JRPGs. Yeah, awesome. MMORPGs. So the what was my point? My point was, this is a little bit different than Hollywood. Hollywood genres, like when you walk into a video store. All right, when you look it up on Netflix, they're kind of in horror section, comedy, basically what kind of experience you're going to receive. They more mirror like books, like romance novels, rom-coms, and action flicks. And in games, you can have a gameplay that's like Pong, but it's a romance. You can have an MMO, but it's horror sci-fi. So the gameplay and the theme are somewhat divorced.
No, E-M-E.
Also, you don't have to know how to spell to be a game developer. The Word spell checks this for you, and then if you're writing code, as long as you do it consistently, it doesn't matter what the letters are, so just make up your own language, it's totally fine. E-M-E, or having a spell check for you, because, anyway, these are somewhat divorced, but work best when they can like support each other. So like having a romantic Pong game, maybe not, but maybe Pac-Man is got romance already in it. Like it's Miss Pac-Man and Mr. Pac-Man. Even in the very first, well, in the very first Miss Pac-Man, there's like a whole little interlude bit where they're like chasing each other around. So Pac-Man does make an appearance in Miss Pac-Man, by the way, if you didn't know that. But largely, you can figure out your gameplay and then theme it with different things. And this can be kind of lucrative for indie developers because you create a gameplay engine that would be like the best Pong engine ever, and then you reskin it with Miss Pac-Man, or you reskin it with Elijah Woods. I don't know. But your game design document should tackle both of these right up front. Higher priority to the gameplay, maybe I should just put numbers here. I'd say that's number 1, this is number 2, and then some other stuff probably goes in there. Detailed description. Your gameplay includes things like controller inputs. So what are your inputs? I'm trying not to stand in front of the board, but it's not working out very well. Your inputs, the kind of consoles that you want it on, I'm not going to write it all down. The kind of consoles, the platform, essentially, if it's console, if it's PC, Mac, Linux. For this, this is one of the reasons why we picked Unity, because it's a little easier to get into. It's got a great community if you run into trouble. And it's essentially got a one-button export to anything you can imagine. It even does, like, BlackBerry devices. And we'll do things like Nintendo if you buy the SDK that goes with it. You have to talk to the Unity guys to get that. So let me just write down Unity, I guess. I like Unity. Unreal is great too, and often people ask me like, which game engine is right for me? And it's really kind of comes down to this. So if you have this figured out, then you can kind of make those decisions. Gameplay for a first-person shooter, I would hands down use Unreal. It is basically a drag and drop first-person shooter platform. Like you can just you just start the thing and it's a first-person shooter. Like it has all of these assets, like just generic assets that look really great. Looks like it's kind of like the Ferrari of game engines. It's really slick looking and is high performance, but it's also a little more technical and unwieldy once you try to actually program it to do something other than a first-person shooter. Unity, on the other hand, has the kind of opposite problem. It's like really easy to get to do what you want it to do, but it doesn't look that great up front. And so you have to spend a lot of time after the fact to get it to look better. And it really kind of depends on what you're building, because if you're only building Mario, then either will work. But if I'm just talking about like kind of your more realistic looking lighting and shaders, then they both do it, but you have to struggle around with the visuals in Unity a little bit more to get them up to par with the defaults of Unreal. Let's just say that. And this is just my opinion. Disclaimer, your opinions may vary. But I had a brief love affair with Unreal, and it was awesome. But ultimately I couldn't get it to do what I wanted to do fast enough. So I prototype everything in Unity, and just it's not too much of a leap to make it look good after the fact. So let's move on to the next kind of phase. So this is kind of the design part of the game. You're like designing it and you're getting it laid out. The next part is development. And people can say like this is part of development also. It is. But really when people talk about being a developer, they're really talking about implementing all the stuff here. So this is where you have your art, and I'm just going to write down a the folder structure that we use internally. So we have a project name. So we're developing a project. We will have an art folder. We will have a code folder. We will have a audio folder. And I know musicians are artists too, but being a visual, this you can just rename this visual art if you really need to. But so this is like your what does it look like? How does it behave? How does it sound? Okay, and at that point, if it's not just me working on it all by myself, you now have separate siloed areas that you can stick your artists and just kind of let them control however they want to like use the art folder, because there's lots of different ways you can do any single task, right? You can let the programmers figure out how the code folder is going to act, and likewise with the musicians. And I later on in development also have a promo folder for things like how am I going to talk about this to other people, if I'm going to send emails out to YouTubers, or if I'm going to be exposing our product at a convention. How do I talk about it? And inside of the promo folder, I would have this exact same structure. Art that we show people, and then documentation, docs. Usually I don't have code in the promo folder, obviously. So all of this stuff gets shoved into the docs folder, and all this is like how to build the game. And ideally, you should, if you're a good document person, then you should be able to take this and email it to any of the implementers, and they should be able to build it without you being in the room. That's the ultimate goal. I mean, you don't ever want to do that. You don't know what the results are going to be, but that's your ultimate goal. Like if you have it detailed and understandable enough that somebody else remotely can figure it out, then you're good to go. With everybody in the same room, you can be a little bit more relaxed about how well this is documented. We usually have game design documents of only like 3 pages. Like they don't really exceed that. Some of the like little technical details might exceed that later on down the road, but your overall high-level game design document should just be as short as possible, because nobody's really going to read it. That's the problem with this system, is that once you have a game design document, no one's going to read it. It's really for you to formulate your ideas. Like if you get them down in some logical order, then you know how to proceed. And then if you really forget what you're doing, then you can go back and reference it. But ultimately, this is just trashed. But it's part of the process to get to the next step. Okay? That's something I like to talk about. 90% of what you do is going to be thrown in the trash. It works that way in the art world. 9 out of 10 drawings don't make it. It works that way in the code world, where your very first draft is not going to make it. Think of code as like writing an essay, where you do your first draft, and then you like, is it working, and are there bugs? Okay, you do a second draft, and you show it to somebody, and they don't like it, and you do a third draft. And this is where iterative design, I'm a pretty big fan of. Like agile methodology, who's heard of this? I know it's kind of a buzzword thing, but it beats the pants off of a waterfall method from days of yore, which is exactly this method right here. Like shipping this off to somebody at Microsoft, and then they make it, and then it gets published, and then you're doomed because you wanted to make changes. Coming from, I was able to buy into this idea of iterative design because I kind of come from the art world, I think, where I'm making a drawing, but I don't just start off by like drawing like the eye and like the pupil, and then like, the, what's that? Eyebrow. And then like the nose, and then like, the mustache. Like you can't You can't draw that way. You'll just draw off the edge of the paper because you started with the eye and you centered it. Okay, it's just not going to work. Oh, okay, it can work. Picasso did it, but you know, you got to be at like some kind of master level to like visualize the thing before you put the pencil to paper. For the rest of us, like mortals, you tend to like do a sketch. You're just doing a sketch, and then you're like, okay, here's where the eyes go, and then there's the mouth, and then I have like Vegeta hair, and whatever your design is that you're gonna draw. And then like once you have like a kind of outline of your base idea, you get a new sheet of paper and a new pencil, and then you go over and you pick out the lines that you want. This is no different than your code. This is a revision, okay? This idea works for every single one of these things. No musician's gonna like start up and put down the track on the first try. It can be done, but no. Ultimately, you're probably not going to. You're gonna have to jam a little bit before you get what you're looking for. Iterative design basically goes through 3 steps. The first is design. The next is implementation. Implement? 2 E's? I don't know. Oh well.
I didn't even put an N in it.
All right. Implement. Test. And this is the diagram you'll see online with like design going to implementation, and then you test it, and then you redesign it. Okay. Has anybody seen this before? Okay. I think this is a little bit off because it's like usually lacking like one more thing, so I'll make a couple modifications to this, which is a goal. This is your goal here. This is what you want, but you don't know you want it yet. You know it's there. It's like some idea. Maybe it's been documented. Maybe you know, but you're just trying things out until you get there. And so this should really kind of look a little bit more like this. So you hit each of these kind of spaces over and over again, but you're narrowing down, targeting in on what you really, really want, okay? You're taking out those lines. You're taking out the code that has been commented out for 3 weeks and you don't need anymore. And, just living in the moment as you're spiraling down this track and zeroing in on what you want. The other thing about iterative design that I tend to do is figure out the test first. So I should do 1, 2, 3. And this is called test-driven development, where you think about what you're going to break first, and then you design it, and then you implement it. And that actually doesn't work out well on the very first pass. Like the first pass, you can start here, but then on every subsequent pass, this is kind of the important stopping point. Like to be able to like test like whether or not what you're doing has any impact on your ultimate goal. Cool? All right. I don't know if that was too much design theory there, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. So developers tend to do this bit. The next rung on the ladder is publishers. Does anybody know what publishers do? No? Yeah, it's a mystery actually. So publishers, what they traditionally publishers are the people who release the material to the public. And they traditionally are the people who fork over the cash to do that. Traditionally, you'd create a document, and then you would shop it around at publishers and say, hey, I have this really awesome idea. I need you to buy into it. But remember what I said about ideas. There's a ton of them, and you really have to like have a good one to like stand out. Nowadays, publishers will want to see like a prototype. So you kind of have to hit this level a little bit before shopping it around to a publisher. But publishers will still fork over the cash to continue your development. I've never done this, So I really don't know how hard it is. But I know some people who have now been um, picked up by, I think it's a Japanese anime company who's wanting to get into video games, and they are, kind of financing their enterprise, their game, their project. So it can happen if you go and meet the right people and find a good fit. Um, Publishers for indie developers is basically Kickstarter. Has everybody heard of Kickstarter? Anybody ever bought anything on Kickstarter? Okay. Anybody like really afraid of Kickstarter? Yeah, I mean it's good. It's good to be afraid. We've run 3 campaigns now, all successful, all paid out, all shipped. But it wasn't in the video game realm. It was in the board game realm. And I do think Kickstarter is really great. It pretty much revitalized the board game industry in America, which was really only like 3 big companies who made Risk and Monopoly and whatever. But now we have like all of these kind of European type games coming to life, but they're all American designers, and I do think it really like saved that industry or started that industry even. Kickstarter for video games was much easier, and now is a lot harder because video games are super complicated, and people have gotten wise that I can't just throw $1 million at this company; they're just never going to make it, unless you really have a piece of documentation that really sells the idea to the public. But you can go directly to your customer base now without any problem. So you have the documentation and you have like this promo folder, and you spend a week, well, maybe 2 weeks, putting up a nice page on Kickstarter, and then you push the button, and then you got to wait around 30 days is typical. It could be 5 if you wanted to, but typically people put their projects up for 30, and I recommend not messing around with that too much. And then you manage that for a month, and then possibly you'll have some funds. But what's more important than the funds is you've made contact with your customer base, and you have tried to connect emotionally with people out in the world who will say, yes, I really like your idea. Who doesn't want a chibi Thor or something? And then we're going to make a game about that. And then they will not only support you financially, they'll support you kind of emotionally, but you have to, like if you're successful, then you have to deliver. Otherwise, they'll shred you emotionally and financially. So if anybody has any Kickstarter questions, I'd be glad to talk more about that in more detail if you want to just email me. Publishers are places like, traditional publishers are places like EA, Activision, I forget, Atari, that's not really around anymore, but ColecoVision was one. Publishers tend to like give you the money to make the project, and then they'll take the majority of it because they ponied up the cash. And oftentimes they'll say, okay, after we've recouped our initial investment plus twice as much, then you can start having like a larger percentage of the royalties. It's kind of a royalty-based structure. Kickstarter is a cash up front structure, so you just have to be careful that you're getting enough cash to survive to put the product out. That's really all it is. So detailed documentation about what you need is pretty implicit. So a lot of times now, developers and publishers are kind of like squished together. Blizzard Entertainment, which actually is owned by Activision, but they develop all of their stuff and they publish it. Valve is another one. They develop the stuff and publish it. Microsoft and Sony, they all have kind of like internal teams. Even EA has like developers on staff, but largely their business model is still like finding other developers like us to do something, and then paying us to do it, so they don't have to keep developers on staff, and they just kind of run the publishing arm. There aren't that many independent publishers, like independent developers, but they do exist. There's a couple in Texas that I like. And then the last thing that happens is it pushes it out the door, which is distribution. And largely, your publisher will kind of handle this. But if you're doing it yourself, then you have to make contact, which you've already done, with your customer base, and deliver it to them at some point in some manner. Traditionally, distributions are places like Target, brick and mortar, Best Buys, and now all of this is kind of digital. So you have the App Store and Steam, which is Valve's App Store, and Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, all of those things that you probably have heard of if you didn't know existed. And at that point, you can start making money on your game. Pricing and understanding the appetite of your customer base is very important at this stage, because you could have the best game in the world and they love the heck out of it, but you sold it for $30 instead of $15, and they will complain about that. So like what your price point is pretty important, right? Yeah, I think that's all I really have to say about that. The last thing on here, which I didn't used to include, but I'm including now, is once it's out, traditionally once it's out in the stores, you're done. It's Black Friday, grandma bought it for the teenager, and you're done. Gave it to her for Christmas. You don't have to really worry about it. You can start working on a different game. And some developers still work like this, but now there's like a whole maintenance movement. So you have to maintain. Maintain. M-A-N-T-A-I. Oh, I put it in the wrong one. There's two I's?
I think both.
Yeah, M-A-I-N-T-E.
I'm bad at English, that's for sure. All right. Okay.
Just
Maintain-
pretend English is your second language.
It's in there. So you have to maintain your product. We've all known that Minecraft has been out for years now, and they just keep rolling out features for it. Like it's basically, the one or two studios. Well, I mean, it is Majengo and then now Microsoft, but that who have owned it over the course of its lifetime. But they have a team that's dedicated to keeping it alive. I kind of blame World of Warcraft for starting this trend, even though I know, the other MMOs were kind of doing the same thing. It's like, let's have our company known for like one game and then support the crap out of that game. And so maybe that's what you want to do. That's kind of what we're starting to do, actually, because at first I was like, I don't know, I get bored with one game. I'm going to like make a different game. When I first set out, I was like, I'm going to make a game of like every genre, one game in every genre, and it'll be great. But the more we get known for some of our Kickstarter success, the more you get typecast into like just kind of doing one thing. So I'd recommend looking at like maybe having your big passion project be serialized, or something like that. Put out chapters a little bit at a time. It also makes this much more able to sustain getting money from your customer base, because you're kind of putting stuff out more often, but you're just asking for smaller amounts, and people don't mind kind of investing their entertainment time this way. I think it was much harder, maybe even just 10 years ago, to do this. But now that everything's connected and people have gotten over the the hurdle of not having a physical product in their hands, but is okay with just purchasing ones and zeros. Yeah, exactly. They you're able to like evolve this. So the game industry is still kind of evolving, and we don't know what's happening next, but this is kind of where things are. There are still independent game development companies that make just a game and then kind of quit. The Behemoth, big fan of the Behemoth, Castle Crashers, and Pit People, and Alien Hominid. They just did one after the other, and then now they're working on a new one because that's what they want to do. Yeah, Supergiant Studios is another favorite of mine. Transistor, Bastion, all very different games and different kinds of gameplay that they seem to be able to just kind of put out there, and then they maintain a little bit, but they don't put out new content for necessarily. I mean, you got to maintain all the bugs at this point. Like if there are bugs that your users are finding, then fix them for God's sakes. Otherwise, they're never going to buy the next one. Let's see. I think that's about it. Let's take questions.
I heard a podcast, a technical podcast, that guy also a major team podcast.
Okay.
And he mentioned that, tell me if this is true or if he's exaggerating it, that
Okay.
the game development world has been devastated. That it is the ratio of people trying to get in, how many games are available outside of the world of Call of Duty.
Sure. Sure.
Big winners it's a nightmare scenario.
Uh,
A lot of stuff has been outsourced to companies
Sure.
that can't make money.
Yep. So the question is basically, how much of a nightmare is it to enter this industry having really no experience because you guys are just getting started, or maybe you have some other skill sets that you want to bring into it, but you haven't really been in the game industry yet. And do we have oversaturation of the market, basically? That kind of question. So the answer, in my opinion, is no, you're fine. It's always been saturated. They just haven't been as good at content, and the barrier to entry is so easy with these kind of game engines that there's a lot more people doing it. But that really doesn't prevent you from really focusing on this. Like, have a good idea. How is your idea different than everybody else's idea? What are your unique selling points? USP. Oh, crap. USP. Unique selling points. And can you sell that to people? Because what I've noticed is, like, just like people don't just watch one movie, they don't play just one game. They can soak up a lot of time in just one game, and they can just watch one movie over and over again because it's their favorite. And they'll always, love it for those reasons. But people will eventually move on. So what's there to take that place? That's really the question. Hopefully it's one of your things. And I think there are several YouTube videos about this from GDC. Some other things you guys should watch at GDC. The Game Developers Conference videos on YouTube. If you can't actually go down to San Francisco and attend the conference yourself,
The conference
was just last week. Yeah.
Last week, yeah.
Yeah, so you got another year now. But I actually think it maybe takes place twice a year. I'm not sure.
Well, there's there are multiple GDC now. There are PAX too.
Yeah. And PAX. Go to PAX. PAX is awesome. If you can get Seattle PAX tickets sold out in like 5 minutes, and it's like 70,000 people. It's insane. PAX East is easier. It's in Boston. PAX South is San Antonio. That might be just board games. I don't know. Look at the PAX website. Penny Arcade Expo, for those people who aren't familiar with what that is. It's probably the largest consumer video game conference that there is. Just gamer conference, board games and video games. And it's outstanding. E3 is nice, but it's largely for the press. GDC is nice, but it's largely for developers. So if you really want to reach your target audience and connect with them directly, PAX is my biggest kind of recommendation in terms of, cons. I really can't say I'm a fan of cons. I mean, I love cons, but like in terms of like getting a following, like you'll have way more online presence down in this area, I think, and reach more people online then 70,000 people is a lot. Don't get me wrong, but they're not all going to stop by your booth. Um, and 70,000, by the way, is the max that the Seattle Convention Center can handle. So I would say don't be afraid of getting into this industry, especially if you're having fun. I mean, but yeah, maybe have some other ulterior motives besides financial gain to start. Then you can get into being cutthroat capitalists. That's fine. Yeah.
Question. So during the life cycle of developing, where do you talk to the ESRB ratings?
Yeah. Good question. I have never had to. But just check out esrb.org, I believe, and they have the rules on there. I have looked at the rules and the submission guidelines, but near the end, that's why we have the ESRB even has a rating for not done yet, and it's RP, rating pending. So it's like we've had our stuff. You'll see this on commercials at the end of commercials too. This game is not yet rated. So near the end, when they can actually significantly say, oh, they're not going to change it that much and add a bunch of, I don't know, gratuitous nudity or something. Like we all want to add to our games. Yeah.
What does the division of manpower look like in a development house? I mean, you've got coders, but you've also got artists, musicians, and Foley artists, and voice actors.
Right. So if it really depends on kind of who you're. Usually, there's kind of a leader of the group, and I tried to keep my company kind of as flat as possible. Valve is super awesome this way. Valve is where I want to retire.
Big company.
LV. So Valve, check them out. And specifically check out their employee handbook, which you can get online now. They have a completely flat structure with no producers at all. I mean, they have a ton of money, so that's somewhat different. But Gabe Newell, the guy who started Valve, is no more. He's not at a higher level than anyone else. If you just got hired, you can go around and tell Gabe what to do. You might not do it. That's the other thing. You don't and you should probably listen to what he says. But according to their literature, they once you're hired in at Valve, you can do whatever the heck you want. You got a desk with wheels on it, and you can go roll it over to the programmer people. Or you can go roll it over to the artists, or go roll it up to the lawyers if you want to be a lawyer or something. So I've kind of tried to. I didn't actually even model my company around that, but I mean we're all pretty egalitarian, and so I really kind of value the people around me's opinion. So I just kind of chose that flat structure. But largely, to answer your question, you'll have one person that kind of is the glue for the team, and that person, if it's a programmer, then your programming is all kind of taken care of. If it's an artist, then your art's probably taken care of. And then you just need auxiliary people around that to complete the project. So with me, let's just say we had 8 people. When we had 8 people, we had Adam and Michael, and they were 3D modelers. It was you and Alyssa for 2D animation. Owen and myself for coding. Burley a little bit. Audio is actually, for our company, the only thing that we actually just kind of hired out. We have really good friends who would do it, but we paid them, and they worked off-site because they had a sound studio and that kind of equipment that is not easy to wheel into my basement. Did I mention I just run this out of my basement? It gets kind of cramped when you get 8 people in there. I used to have a separate property for it, but consolidations. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question. It can be wildly different. Other places I've worked are straight up art houses. If you're interested in the art kind of things, Super Genius in Oregon City, they work on crazy stuff. Mafia 3, Overwatch, Skylanders, pretty big stuff. but they primarily don't do any coding. They just like make the art assets and ship them back to the main companies. And that's where your question earlier about like outsourcing stuff to China, and I constantly get emails of like, hey, use our small team and we can save you tons of money. And that's true. It's hard not to, you know, take them up on that offer, but at the same time, having somebody in-house for something that changes so quickly, and you need to iteratively test this much, it's hard to have a remote person do that. I've always made people kind of come into the studio, which I know is kind of sacrilege in this day of like online connectedness. But I mean, and you can still do Skypes and meetings and stuff. That's fine. But like, it's easy for me to look over at her screen and say, "Oh, make this quick little adjustment," you know, or what do you think about this idea? She can come over and play the game that I've been working on, and say, "I don't like the trigger system. You know, let's remap that." Okay. If you're going to outsource stuff, again, you have to have this all very lined up because you're going to be paying for something that you specify with maybe like one revision included in the price. Yeah. The other place that's not outsourcing place here in Portland is Liquid Development, which is just right down on 2nd and some cross street. But before you hit Burnside, I think, or no, wait, which one? I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's not too far from here. It's within walking distance of here. I think it's by Kell. Are we by Kells? We're kind of by Kells, right?
Very close.
Yeah. Anyway, Liquid Development, check them out. If you're artists, these are kind of art things, so I can kind of throw them out there. If you're really looking for something code-wise, come to Pig Squad. They have meetings every couple weeks. Usually they're at like Lucky Lab over on Quimby, and super personable. They exist to like find you resources. They're a nonprofit. Doesn't cost it anything.
You have to do any coding outside of the
Yes, a little bit. When we export to the iOS stuff, we got to kind of what Unity exports. And I also don't know if this is still true because the last time I did an iOS project was 4 years ago. But so it might be a little different now. But Unity exports like a block of assets and code that you then bring into what's it? Xcode, and then you run on a Macintosh to build for the iOS. It's largely streamlined, but it's still it's a far cry from the one button click export that they kind of tout as like a feature. So plan a couple days to get it onto the proper device, and do that sooner than later. Test it on the device as soon as possible. I preach this and then don't follow it a lot of times. I still haven't like put stuff on. We were like building a mobile thing the other day, and I still haven't put it on Android. So, but I would recommend doing that like first thing. Just get a blue screen with a piece of text that says this game works, and then that's it. And if you can get that to show up on your phone, then that's a good starting point. You know at least that works, and now you have a baseline for when things go wrong. So. Speaking of when things go wrong, I really would like to recommend version control. Some sort of version control system. Most of you are probably familiar with these kind of things. Yeah, exactly. So Git, SVN is kind of outdated now. There's a Microsoft version. What is it called again? Oh, maybe. The Microsoft one is something else, but there's lots of these things. Pick your poison. Commit at the end of every day. Like when you get up from your desk and ready to go home, spend the extra 5 minutes to make sure you're saving your stuff to the, to your GitHub or your SVN server or whatever, because I guarantee you a week later you'll need to roll it back. It's not, usually you don't have to. Like again, but like 10% of the time you'll need to like you've broken something and you don't know why. You roll back and then try and figure it out. Yeah. You know, it's the equivalent of putting little numbers next to your files in school. So, is version control something that Tech Academy? Okay, really like. Okay, good.
It's nice to track stuff back.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And then you got like a nice little log too. It kind of forces you to kind of document things. I mean, I know a lot of people just like WSAD into the, but leave a comment that makes some sense because you may have to roll back to that, and you may not know what those string of characters really means if you're lazy. Just take the 5 minutes to think about what you're going to say and type it in there. I really recommend it. It does take time to figure out what to call things. The hardest part about coding, in my opinion, is like naming stuff, naming conventions. Absolutely, they're a pain in the butt, but totally worthwhile. Spend a half-hour meeting to figure out like one variable name. It's totally worth it because then you have that name, you know what it all means, your artists know what it means, and you can actually start to have a conversation without drawing on napkins. What's up?
When you're starting out, like developing a game, and you get through the design phase and all the documents and stuff, and you first start going into to make the game. Like let's say you're making like Mario. How do you start? Do you start by making the character and then a small part of a level, doing that, or do you make the entire level? And
Right.
Then start
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, just to repeat the question a little bit, like how do you start to make a game? Do you start with just like making Mario and a little bit of a level, or do you flesh it out more? And it really kind of depends. I feel like with Mario, yeah, I would like figure out what the big mechanics are. Well, like left and right movement, vertical jump, blocks in the way. So just build a small little thing that does that, and then get that working as best you can before you kind of move on. And you don't, I mean, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be playable. Like that's the key word, like playable. Is it playable? Getting to a playable build so that you can start to figure out what you don't like about it is really important. So rapid prototyping is another kind of software term for it, but playable build is kind of your first step. So and then you can like worry about like okay, we want a bigger level, so the thing has to scroll. Like, how are we going to handle the camera movements and like collision detection on things like that? What kind of monsters are we going to have? And then those can kind of come later. I would say your people resource-wise, kind of getting back to your earlier question, is you kind of need the coders and the designers up here up front, and then later on kind of refine it with artists once it's kind of playable, because you can do, we just build everything with Unity in squares, Unity squares, Unity buttons. And so our whole game looks like a big mess. It's just squares and it's not pretty, and but it's playable and it's responsive. Like the responsive, I feel for us, for me anyway, is like very important. Like I feel I have more fun when my controls are responsive. Not all games are like that. Sometimes they make them difficult on purpose to ramp the difficulty. Like they put a little lag in there, but really there's no reason to, except that it's more difficult and other players like it. Just like there's no reason to have roguelikes kill off your entire character base and then restart from scratch. But it's a difficulty, setting basically, and some people love that. So support that. Did I answer it? Good. Yeah. Anything else?
Last questions.
Yeah.
How long does it take you to make one of your games?
Again, it kind of depends, but how long it takes to make a game is, I would say 6 months would be kind of my minimum. 6 months to really go from the kind of most basic, fun, playable thing. Like you can make things playable much quicker, like in just a few weeks these days. But then you got to kind of refine it before it can release. Having said that, we made, I don't even know if I want to show. We made this game. I bad-mouthed it on the internet. This game for Nickelodeon in 3 months with nothing to to start with, and they're like, well, you just got to get it out before Black Friday, so make it for us. And are you crazy enough to do that? I'm like, well, for enough money, I'm crazy enough to do that. How much quality does there have to be in it? Oh, not that much quality. Okay, all right, well, then we're good to go. But for a manufactured boy band dance clone, I think it's a pretty solid game.
That's pretty much what most of the movie games.
Yeah. They got no time to like the movie's going to be released. They didn't think about it in time. They got to get it. They got to crunch it. Yeah. I know. I should have just had you play videos up there on the background.
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't use that.
That's okay. Thank you so much for coming in. I know they have to head out pretty quick, so I'll let them pack up while I'm talking. I have surveys. If you've never been to the Tech Academy, come visit me, and I'd love your feedback on today's event. And then his email is up there. We'll leave that up there if you want to reach out to him.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
So I kind of a first-person shooter. So I start with Unreal Engine.